Well, hey folks, Real Honesty with John Ritland's Times of Wrestling to Piss Me Off, Redux Part 16, last one until September. I'm going to have a bunch of stuff that I'm doing. Work's also going to be super busy. I'm going to have other commitments. And besides reviewing WWE New Japan, the WWE New Japan products and starting up my Which Was Worse series, shout out to Ed Hitman 683 for that, where I'm going to compare title reigns, booking decisions, matches, pay-per-views that have similar traits and which one was actually worse. Which one was like worst of the month or something. That's going to take up a lot of time. And again, work and other commitments are just simply going to take up so much time. And I need to rest at some point. So I'm going to pull back on some shows like this and Questions for Me and pick them up a little bit later in the year. This one will probably wrap up sometime this year, maybe sometime in early 2019. And then I'll keep the list around. I can always add more stuff to it as we go on in the future. But if you guys can think of stuff that I have not mentioned, please leave comments. And if it's stuff that pissed me off, I will be more than happy to talk about it in a future installment. But there will be, probably depending on how many topics I get through here, there'll probably be 4 or 5 more. So anyway, let's get cracking on with it. WWECW, Sweet Bleeding Christ. This could have been so much goddamn better than it was. It was terrible. It was an abortion of a show. I mean, from the outset. At the outset, it was not going to be. It was never going to be ECW, and I'm never the biggest fan of ECW. I just want to put that right out there. But they have their fans still to this day. They had plenty of passionate fans back then, and for people to like that, that was great. And it did provide an alternative to WWE and WCW, and that was great. But then it ended, and you had the rise and fall of ECW documentary that just sold gangbusters, did so well, and was a really good documentary. They decided to revive it for a one-night stand pay-per-view. Have a bunch of guys there and stuff like that. And then that did so well, they decided to do it again in 2006. But this time they were going to have it lead in to reviving ECW. And this is what they did to everybody that liked ECW. That's WWE, that is. If they had called anything other than ECW, would have had a chance to succeed. They didn't. And sci-fi had its influence by having characters like the Zombie, Macho Libre, which is, Nacho Libre, and some, in the gear that Jack Black's character had, and also, doing Macho Man gimmicks. And they had other stuff. They had the other, stupid one-off gimmicks that meant nothing, where Sandman just came down and caned everybody. I mean, and I guess that sort of worked because that's about how you had to use Sandman, because it couldn't really work. Never could. I mean, and he's admitted he really couldn't. In ECW, he was great. WCW, less so, even though he did provide some big ratings. In WWE, I don't know how he stayed employed in WWE for about a year or just over a year, since he wasn't much of a worker. And sorry, he wasn't. I mean, if people like him, great. I'm not saying he's a bad guy, but he was a shit worker. But then you just look at what it was. It was just a vehicle to get new talent over. And there's nothing wrong with that. You couldn't rely on these ECW originals after they beat their bodies to shit. And some of them weren't going to be around in the company after a year or something like that. So use them to have good feuds with some of these new talents and get them over. But calling it ECW set these unrealistic expectations. It muddied up everything. It made it worse. And put them in a hole that they couldn't climb out of. In December to Dismember, oh, for fuck's sake. I mean, that was an atrocity. They had 2 matches announced right before the pay-per-view was going. Now, granted, this was in a time where it was right after Survivor Series. Then they had December to Dismember, and then a few weeks later they had Armageddon. Or a couple weeks later they had Armageddon. So it was like that whole thing that they did in 2013 where they did, Night of Champions, Battleground, and I think Hell in a Cell. Or something like that. Yeah, I think those are the 3 pay-per-views they did. And the whole point is they did that. It was 3 pay-per-views in the span of 6 weeks. And it was ridiculous. It was absolutely ridiculous because nobody was going to buy that shit. And that was right before the network started. This, December to Dismember, I believe earned the lowest buy rate of any WWE pay-per-view, at least in the modern era. 90,000 pay-per-view buys. I mean, since going on pay-per-view, that's the best they could do. Granted, they only advertised 2 matches, but then you had guys like Great Khali on there, who's the walking oak tree and walked like Hank Hill's dad, only somehow worse, because I think Hank Hill's dad at least had some knees. He just didn't have any goddamn shins or something like that. It was really ridiculous. No, Khali was never a good worker at all. But guys like Dreamer were broken down. That was in 2006. Sabu, I mean, the botch machine. Look, he was innovative with his offense, but a botch machine he was. And Balls Mahoney, all due respect to him, he wasn't really going to get over after they started sanitizing ECW, because even though he was a good worker, he had been pigeonholed in that hardcore stint. And then they had guys like Big Show as part of it. They had Kurt Angle as part of ECW for a couple months. They were pushing Lashley as the ECW champion right after December to Dismember. CM Punk wasn't being used properly. Sabu was even taken out of the Extreme Elimination Chamber and replaced with Hardcore Holly. And all due respect to Hardcore Holly, who is legit tough, the fans didn't want to see that. It was just basically a giant FU to ECW fans. And then that led to Heyman exiting, and then Vince had basically taken over the whole damn thing, and it hadn't really worked. It was not working. By mid-2007, you didn't even recognize it. There were very few originals even left. I don't even know if there were any originals left besides Dreamer by 2007, 2008, because RVD had left the company, Sabu had left the company. I think Balls Mahoney lasted in the company until sometime in 2008, 2009, but he was mainly used on house shows. Sandman was gone from the company by like a July or August of 2007. It was really, really embarrassing, because it just, had they called it something other than ECW, could have succeeded. They didn't. They relied on the ECW name thinking it would work, and it didn't. And it was counterproductive. It ruined what should have been a great concept, and getting new talents over wasn't a problem. And shaping it into what WWE wanted it to be was great, but if they had called it something else, it could have succeeded better. But now it's just like this stain on WWE's reputation, when really some of the match quality was actually pretty good. And there were some really, really good talents and some good feuds that they had there. But calling the ECW did them no favors, 100%. Now we move on to, and a couple of these I might skip over, just a little bit, but, briefly mention how some of them bother me. The death of the tag team division. Now, I know that the New Day and Usos have done, some great matches, and, there are other tag team matches that have done pretty well. And some the Bar and stuff like that, and some tag teams are over as hell and actually are working really hard. But tag team wrestling is not featured nearly as well as it was even a number of years ago, whether it was in the Attitude Era or actually in the Ruthless Aggression Era. I don't know what Vince has against tag team wrestling. I don't know what the deal is, but even with some of the great tag teams they have, besides NXT, there's really, what they're allowed to do in NXT, there isn't really much going on in a tag team division. Like, oh, we have these guys, hey, we got a 10-minute match, let's just throw these guys out here. It doesn't really mean anything. They don't really build a lot of these feuds. I mean, the feud they do build, they either put them on the pre-show or put them in the death slot on the pay-per-view, and it doesn't do them any good. Like what they did with the New Day, Bludgeon Brothers, and Usos triple threat at WrestleMania 34. That went on, I want to say, right after the Rousey, Angle, Triple H, and Stephanie match. I mean, that did them no favors. For some reason, just main roster tag team wrestling just doesn't mean that much. I mean, one of my favorite teams, the Revival, is marginalized. They did make a recent appearance, recent as of this recording, at a house show in Oklahoma City challenging the Undisputed Era, which I saw photos of that, and that was actually pretty damn cool. And I think that's a pretty good idea to take these guys and maybe rotate them in and out and stuff like that, and have them put over some of the guys and use them properly, because if you're not going to use them on the main roster, you might as well put them back in NXT for a bit, work for Tyson Kidd until his unfortunate injury. I think they could do that with some of the women. Like, I don't know if Alicia Fox is still with the company or even recovered from her injury. Maybe put Alicia Fox down in NXT. I think she could have some good feuds. She could be pretty over. She's been employed with the company for a damn long time, apparently 12 years, which, good for her. Seriously, good for her. That's great to be able to last in the company that long, especially as a woman, when they tend to rotate women in and out of the company with some regularity. Natty has been employed by the company, I want to say, for about 10 years. Tamina for about 9 at this point. But the death of it's not even necessarily the death of the tag division, it's the death of the importance of the tag division. Because the tag titles mean so damn much, and how in the world can Vince not see that there is money in the tag team division? There is. People like some tag team wrestling when you build up the feuds properly. If you just throw them out there and then wonder why they aren't succeeding, well, you got to build it right. You got 3 hours of Raw as of now, possibly 3 hours of SmackDown if they move to another network. Dear God, 6 hours of programming. Do not make 205 Live a separate hour after that. Just lump it in with that, because otherwise It's pretty fucking ridiculous. Ugh. Oh god, that's gonna be so embarrassing. That's what they should do. Actually, they should just have 205 Live as part of SmackDown. Just have that's what they should do. But tag team wrestling is a lost art, and in WWE. I mean, I'm not saying in anywhere else because other companies seem to be doing it right. Ring of Honor, New Japan, especially. Impact does what they can, but they're still trying to rebuild. They really need to do better with the tag team division. They really do. It's actually embarrassing. And treatment of the Divas women. This mainly is referring to the time where they had so many talented women. This was like after Trish and Lita had left. But even when they were there, you had some women that really weren't all that great at wrestling. But after Trish and Lita left, because they left within a couple months of each other, you still had Victoria, who was great in the ring, and still is, I'm sure. Mickey. You had various other talents, but you were pushing Ashley Mazzaro. And look, I've ranted about Ashley Mazzaro before, but I'm going to rant about her as a worker, not as a person. I don't think she's necessarily a bad person. But the fact that she was even given pushes and given the green light to, be in some of these feuds when she wasn't really ready did no favors to the women. They were giving it to a lot of women that weren't really able to carry the ball, whether it was because of injuries, whether it was because of inexperience. Melina did pretty well as well as she could. I still am not the biggest fan of Melina. I think that some people overrate her. I'm not saying that she's overrated, but some, particularly, a few idiots on Twitter, and sorry, you guys are idiots, you sheepish fans, treat her like the greatest woman of all time. She may be a great woman, but she ain't the greatest women's wrestler of all time. They did have other, like Beth Phoenix, they misused for a while, even though she was used pretty well. Her and Natty were a great team. But they had so many of these models that just couldn't really work. And sorry, that applies to the Bellas in 2009 to 2012. When they left, they weren't really all that good. And yeah, okay, they improved after they got back. Great. You could only go anywhere but up when you're at the bottom. There are so many women that got into matches or that they had, like, when they had bikini contests and this kind of stuff. And I'm talking after the Attitude Era, where it's like, okay, you got these great women's wrestlers and let's put on these models out here who may have been nice women, and I'm sure they were, but it was passe and it was not entertaining anymore. That's what the internet's for. The internet's that's part of what the internet's for, but I'm just saying, you parade these women out there on WWE TV, okay, and then if you try to make them wrestlers, they can't really be taken seriously anymore. Now, granted, 90% of the women they tried out there as models never actually got in the ring or did anything good in the ring because they weren't trained wrestlers. That didn't do them any favors. It didn't make the women's division look any good. It really was just it was a travesty how the women's division was used for a number of years. And even into the AJ Lee era. Now, yes, Candice Michelle was somebody who had been a Diva Search contestant. It did improve. And actually was champion for a while. Layla was somebody that really improved and honed her craft. And Layla's one of my favorite women that, has been in WWE for the past, I'd say, 15 years. Somebody who's underrated. I mean, I did make mention that maybe she could be in the Hall of Fame. I don't know if I actually should stick by that or not. But I'm a fan of Layla. I mean, I could understand she's not in the Hall of Fame. Totally understand that. But Layla was really, really talented. I'm sure still is. She's been out of wrestling for a while. Seems very, very happy. Married to the former Ricky Ortiz. Great stuff. They seem really happy together, and Layla's awesome. As of this recording, still follows me on Twitter. I find that really flattering. I think Layla's a good, was a good worker. Michelle McCool, her and Layla as Lay Cool were really good. There were a lot of really talented women, and they seemed to just undercut all of them when they shouldn't have, because a lot of the women actually could work pretty damn well. Some couldn't. Then you had AJ Lee, Caitlyn, that kind of stuff, and then we can get to the whole thing of that. It really took until NXT started making their women's division seem better. It took a lot of starch out of the whole damn thing. It really did, and I really don't understand why they did that. They had a lot of women that could have carried the ball and could have done well, and they just treat them like fluff. And a lot of women's careers flourished after they left WWE. Gail Kim in particular did. Victoria, who was Tara on the in Impact, is somebody that did really, really well. Mickie James had a great run in Impact Wrestling. There were a lot of women they could have been used a whole lot better in WWE that they didn't, and Impact actually used them better. That's one thing that a lot of people need to remember about Impact. Even though I knock the company now, I mean, and with good reason, not saying that the company can't do great things, but they haven't. They've, fallen on their ass. They're rebuilding back up, though. Impact did the Knockouts division way before this whole Women's Revolution thing, and I talked about that in an Unpopular Opinion show, which you can find on my timeline, or just ask me and I'll send you a link on Twitter. Check out my assorted playlist because I think my Unpopular Opinion shows are on there. But I talked about how Impact gets way too little credit for what it did for not just women's wrestling, but wrestling in general, especially for a period of about 5-6 years. But yeah, the treatment of the women and just how so many women could have done a whole lot more and weren't given a chance was pretty damn ridiculous. And now we go to no more managers or valets. And this is now it's with a little asterisk because Lana's kind of a pseudo manager and stuff like that. Zelina Vega is a great manager. She's great mouthpiece for Andrade Cien Almas. You had Paul Ellering with AOP, and he was perfect for them. And I don't know why they split him up. I don't know why. I think it's really dumb because they have done next to nothing with AOP in about the month and a half that they've had him on the main roster. And I'm not saying shoot him right into the title picture immediately, but they had a debut match, and then they had another match, I think a week or two later, and then that's it. I haven't even seen him on Raw the past few weeks that I can recall. But yeah, the managers, valets need to make a comeback. They really do. I do not understand why why WWE does not realize this. Yes, people need to know how to speak for themselves and stuff like that, but managers and valets can be used correctly, and that way women that maybe, if they're recovering from injuries, make them valets to certain managers, stuff like that. Like, do what they did with Alicia Fox, only don't have Alicia Fox scream. Have, women in certain roles if they can't wrestle, like Lana being that, Dana probably being in about the best position that she can be in Titus Worldwide because she's not really that good in the ring. They got to consider, maybe making some other ones managers and stuff like that. I don't know if Carmella's going to work out as a wrestler. I could be wrong. But they have a lot of women that they could use in key roles and have them be a ringside, transition some of them to being managers, but also a lot of male talents that they could use as managers, like that are older talents, but still have a lot to give. They can't really compete in the ring anymore. You gotta kind of figure out a way to bring managers and valets back in a bigger role, because that was one of the things that really succeeded for wrestling in the 60s, 70s, 80s, even the 90s for a while, was how good managers were, and they need to do that. They need to do that more. So that's just all I gotta say about that. They really should, because it pisses me off that you see some of these talents floundering, and with the right nurturing and maybe with a manager, they can get more comfortable and get over. If you just shove them right out there, they're not going to be able to succeed. Like Andrade's not good with English in his promos. He's Spanish. I mean, he shouldn't have to be. He can learn it here and there, but Zelina's a great, mouthpiece for him. He lets his actions speak in the ring. That kind of stuff works. They need to do better with managers. The bottom line. Anyway, that's what I gotta say. So I'm finishing up on that. So agree, disagree with what I said. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Twitter link in the description. It's been Real Honesty with Jar Mifflin. I'm Jar Mifflin. I'll see you soon.